In 1967, French author and theorist Roland Barthes first introduced his theory of the death of the author in his essay Les Mots des Auteurs. In it, he suggests that an author's biographical facts, their politics, religion, or experiences, shouldn't hold special weight when identifying the authorial intent of the work, but rather it should be left to speak for itself and be interpreted how the reader sees fit. I won't go into too much detail on the concept, as there have been many videos and essays that address it better than I can, and I do recommend checking them out. It remains a prevalent theory today, though has grown more and more complicated as Barthes suggests that an author's work exists in a vacuum, and now with the advent of social media, the relationship an audience has with the author and their actions is more unavoidable than ever.
I want my readers and I want my viewers to be afraid when my characters are in danger. I want them to be afraid to turn the next page because the next character may not survive it.
Like it or not, the supplemental material that frames the text itself, or the paratext, does influence our interpretation of, and more tangentially, our reception to the text itself. The story can no longer cease to exist once the work is concluded, alienated within its own world. Especially when some authors refuse to die.
I'm not dead!
Yeah, he says he's not dead.
Yes, he is. I'm not!
He isn't?
Well, he will be soon. He's very ill.
So to speak. You can also see this phenomenon in film with the likes of The Hobbit, Fantastic Beasts, or Star Wars prequels.
I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere.
That shift our overall perception to the original works themselves due to their recontextualizing of the characters and story and explicit authorial intent.
It was said that you would destroy the Sith, not join them! Bring balance to the Force, not leave it in darkness!
Or as I like to call it, the too much of a good thing theory, where the author or adapter in some of these cases refuses to let their work end and their continued additions to the world diminish the collective effect of their brand. My interpretation of the Phantom of the Opera musical evolved due to the paratext of its film adaptation, and especially the hypertext of the It's Totally Not Just for the Money sequel, Love Never Dies, in a much more prominent way than LaRue's original novel ever impacted my interpretation of the original musical. As an audience member, I was able to separate the two as an adaptation of the material, as they were both works from two different authors. But as the film and Love Never Dies are both the handiwork of Britain's #1 Eilerophile, that line becomes blurred. Subsequent viewings of the former almost seem to read as fanfiction now, as I have to grapple with knowing Sir Andrew's explicit intent. Knowing that this,
Christine, I love you.
now leads to this.
And I loved you. Yes, I loved you. I'd have followed anywhere you led.
Reduces the overall impact of this.
It's over now. No music
Oh, wait, nope. Guess it's not. And as confusing or unfortunate as this all may be, my personal love or hatred for Sir Webby's work isn't implicitly harmful to others. It remains just that, personal. We should shift gears away now from Barthes' original theory and look at how an author's direct actions against their audience end up speaking for their work as a whole. As in,
How dare you stand where he stood?
and you thought Splash Mountain would be the only hot take in this video. It's no secret that Rowling's actions over the past several years have deeply impacted the ongoing perceptions of her work, especially her refusal to let her story go.
Let me go.
No.
Her initial outing at Dumbledore created a media frenzy, but with every subsequent project, her insistence on the notion that her character was always written that way, and it wasn't just a well-timed publicity stunt, seems more and more hollow. The Fantastic Beasts films provided the perfect opportunity to definitively reinforce Dumbledore's sexuality, as Rowling was its screenwriter, and yet she continued to dance around the issue, asking the audience to instead watch the space around the character. And the final product is so coded it makes LeFou look like Tu Wong Fu. And this is coming from the woman who's had no problem explicitly sharing that wizards shat themselves for hundreds of years, and that house elves enjoyed being slaves. Which, again, all this may personally stretch your tolerance for cringe in the Harry Potter series.
Shut up! Shut up!
But it doesn't hold much weight on reality. Now that Rowling has doubled down on her opinions against the LGBTQ community, specifically transgender rights, the paratext of her celebrity platform has caused a directly negative and harmful impact on a large portion of her audience. Readers that have grown up and fallen in love with her work now have to frame it with the parameters that its creator doesn't support them or even respect their lives. And that's way more damning than knowing Voldemort's fecal habits. And while the audience members in question can avoid association with the author directly, the effect of the author's work and what it now stands for becomes harder to avoid. From bookstores to theme parks, JK's works continue to pop up again and again, and knowing that she takes a cut from each $9 butterbeer you buy can lead you to question the morality of supporting the entire brand. The weight of the paratext ends up eclipsing the weight of the text. Don't worry, we'll get there. Thankfully, many are speaking out and holding creators accountable for their actions, and calling into question the socio-political impacts that their actions have on their audiences. We can no longer ignore the man behind the curtain. When questioning their intentions, sometimes the author and their work become one and the same. And this questioning includes not just literature or film, but all aspects of the arts, including theme parks. What tends to be thought of as a rather facile art form has now been recognized to hold just as much societal influence as its high art counterparts. And in a similar vein to film, there's been a rising interest in the theme park design process outside of the actual experience. While this focus on the design element of a theme park environment has always been present, especially in Disney's case with Walt's Disneyland series to promote the park,
Walt Disney's Disneyland.
When you wish upon a star.
the theme park fandom has kind of evolved into its own entity. The success of the D23 Expos, Halloween Horror Nights previews, and Disney Plus series like The Imagineering Story or One Day at Disney showcase the fascination parkgoers have with the backstory of their favorite attractions, even if it's all presented under the watchful eye of Big Brother. And this obsession over the history or folklore of various attractions have even directly led to certain rejected ideas coming to fruition many years later. There's now a balance of backstage and onstage focus, with the cultural awareness of certain attractions' problematic messages also now coming to light. The rise in socially fueled refurbishments are leading more parkgoers to question the ramifications of the material being presented overall and holding it accountable. Which brings us to the question at hand. Should an attraction's message be judged in accordance to its paratext and cultural implications, or rather, should we allow the death of the Imagineer? For the sake of this conversation, let's keep our focus on Disneyland itself. In 1997, long before the likes of Johnny Depp and Jeffrey Rush invaded the attraction, Disneyland's Pirates of the Caribbean featured one of the first major politically inspired refurbishments, and backlash due to the changed material. The ransacking pirates who had previously been lustily chasing helpless maidens through the town,
I be willing to share, I be. For kids.
traded one sin for another, and would now be chasing helpless maidens carrying platters of food. The LA Times article detailing the change was chock full of unhappy Pirates fans who claimed the park was becoming too PC, a sentiment that future, and possibly the same, disgruntled fans would echo 22 years later. Or in other words, the biggest snowflakes the park had seen since Adventures Through Inner Space closed.
Boom. Roasted.
For many, it was the first time the park had openly come out in addressing some of its more problematic material. The park had edited out some of its more taboo establishments before, but never to such national attention. The tobacco shop on Main Street quietly closed back in 1990, though the Tobacco Store Indian remains to this day. And in 1986, the Country Bear Jamboree changed its original set list, which included such hits as All the Guys Who Turn Me On, Turn Me Down, and Blood on the Saddle, for the more family-friendly fare of the vacation and Christmas specials. The need for a Pirates update may have also been a result of Disney's hyper-awareness to the public's perceptions of their park's social codes, due in part to the controversies involving the ban of same-sex dancing at the Videopolis nightclub in the late 80s, and the more recent failure of Disney's America, the proposed Virginia-based theme park expansion in the 90s. The America expansion failed for a variety of reasons, though one of the more infamous was the subject material of the proposed park, or as its creative director Bob Weiss put it, the highs and lows of America, which would have included, and I quote, what it was like to be a slave and what it was like to escape through the Underground Railroad.
You know, for kids.
Keep in mind this proposal came some 20 years after Splash Mountain was built. When the Magic Kingdom opened their watered-down version of Pirates, they didn't even attempt to recreate the maiden chasing of the original, and instead was the first version of the attraction to opt for the gluttony-based substitute scene. Bob Berenick, who was the Imagineer in charge of the Pirates refurb, said in a 1999 interview, "I would say the response was 97% against us even touching Pirates of the Caribbean. It was absolutely overwhelming, hundreds of letters a day. That has all turned around. It hasn't been 100 letters in favor, but it's been none against and 20 to 40% in favor." To help account for this eventual positive response, San Diego State sociologist Gordon Clanton states in the LA Times article, "It shows, progressively so I think, that the tendency to rid ourselves of demeaning images and bad role models is becoming far more mainstream than maybe any of us realized." The simplicity, or some may say naivete, of Walt's vision in the 50s and 60s just couldn't fly anymore. Later, in the early 2000s, Imagineering also demonstrated a growing recognition of what was culturally appropriate. When designing Disneyland's Second Gate, Imagineers had to reconcile with the aftermath of Princess Diana's death, as they had originally planned for a high-speed paparazzi-themed roller coaster for the Hollywood section of the park. Deemed as obvious bad taste now, they had to shift gears at the last minute and, with no budget left, managed to compile Superstar Limo together just in time for the park's opening. In recent years, continued changes to Pirates and script adjustments to the Jungle Cruise reflect an indication towards progress. And while many of these experiences can be deemed a product of their time, particularly Adventureland's cultural appropriation in general, the negative impacts from their depictions may finally be addressed. With that said, though, while Disney has demonstrated awareness to the political impact their parks have on society, they still have a long way to go before they can be considered woke. Literally, next door to Pirates is an attraction that opens with a suicide gag.
Of course, there's always my way.
And Fantasyland features both an attraction where a character calls you a jackass,
Go ahead, make a jackass out of yourself.
and another where you literally go to hell. This was a park that featured an Aunt Jemima's Pancake House when it first opened, after all, complete with a walk-around Aunt Jemima character. And it seems that the racial stereotypes of the Tiki Room have slipped under the radar for now because, those Dole Whips sure are tasty.
Buenos dias, senorita. My siestas are getting shorter and shorter.
Your mileage with the extent of how offensive each attraction is will vary, but point being, the park still has its fair share of controversial material that doesn't appear to be leaving anytime soon. Which brings us to the rabbit. One could argue that Splash Mountain was doomed from the very beginning. Song of the South has been Disney's most controversial feature since its premiere, and the company's banned its home release for decades, and besides its hit song, makes no active mention of the film. Even the Indians in Peter Pan or the Siamese Cats in Lady and the Tramp have been more widely corrected than this film.
Don't, please don't!
Well,
Lady!
Which makes you wonder why Splash Mountain was created in the first place. Yes, as Disney fans know, it seemed a natural fit for the recently ousted Animals of America Sings, an attraction that featured a similar Southern-inspired scene, but as time has gone on, Disney's deteriorating response to the film has only fueled the controversy around it. It's practically become a tradition for an overzealous fan to ask ex-CEO Bob Iger about it at every stockholder meeting. Disney could have released it with the citation that similar works of the era have now been given, but at this point even that seems unlikely and frankly would probably be too little too late, which just leaves us with Splash Mountain. When looking at the attraction itself, you can almost see the physical stitches where the Imagineering team painstakingly tried to tie together the not quite as offensive elements of the film and create a semi-cohesive story that had to honor its Uncle Remus origins, the Disney film itself, and had to capitalize on the return investment of those pesky America Sing animatronics. And to top it off, Michael Eisner's insistence that the name of the attraction helped promote Touchstone's upcoming Tom Hanks Mermaid movie, it just seems strained from the get-go. Even if the attraction now surgically removes all of its racist overtones, there's no way they could rise above its association to its source material. Song of the South's controversy and growth into legend will always overshadow the attraction itself, despite Tony Baxter's intentions. Most of its writers have never even seen the film, yet remain fully aware of its infamy. And let's be honest, beyond the Disney purists, the ride's popularity is largely due to its thrill factor, not its character or story or theming. And the thrills are one of the few guarantees the new attraction has. Even those beloved America Sing animals may find a new life once again, as they can technically be deemed canon within the film. The name's vague enough that it could technically remain as well. There will still be splashes and a mountain after all. Disney's recent affinity for colons phrasing could easily be applied here, with it being dubbed Splash Mountain Tiana's Mardi Gras Adventure Mission Breakout. Princess and the Frog not only is a much more beloved film than Song of the South ever was, it has the potential to help add some much needed diversity to a park where It's a Small World continues to be the only culturally diverse attraction, and that's in Fantasyland. The press release for the refurb does have the rushed undertones of a slapdash fix, and it might be, but hopefully they will devote the necessary time and care to the experience itself and make it worthwhile. And that means no Frog Tiana animatronics to save the budget. If you're going to preach representation, you need to commit to that representation. Personally, I don't think theme parks can or should be viewed in a vacuum. Like any form of media, their attractions reflect and comment on the society from which they were created, for better or for worse. And the cultural awareness of the problematic connotations with said attraction, land, or park need to continue to be examined and held accountable. We can argue about an Imagineer's intentions any day, but for some, the paratext will always outweigh the text of the attraction. If we want more people to take the theme park going experience seriously, then we have to hold it to an equally high standard ourselves. Passing it off as children's entertainment, or the excuse that since it's primarily based in retro escapism, it can afford to be offensive, is both a disservice to the issues at hand and the potential remedies. Corporations are now being forced to reveal their socio-political ties more than ever, and yes, while profit may always be at the forefront of every business decision, some genuine good can come from this. Retiring attractions or brands that directly target a portion of their audience should be a natural and healthy progression of the medium. It's at least a better reason than the ever-beloved synergy you constantly hear them talk about. Now, for those who claim that the splash announcement's a slippery slope that could lead to the erasure of other potentially troubled areas of the park, like the Tiki Room or Tom Sawyer Island, I actually think those areas should be scrutinized. As consumers, we should question these products and determine which ones need improvement. We should continue to challenge these experiences out of the love we have for these parks and the fact that we know it can and should be better. And I sincerely hope that somewhere deep within the walls, or at least on the Zoom calls, of Disney Imagineering or Universal Creative, they are having these tough conversations on how to improve their parks. And these press releases aren't just for show. Frankly, with JK's recent behavior, I wouldn't be surprised to hear that the rumored Fantastic Beasts land falls off the table in the next year or so. Oh darn. We are collectively beginning a very long and difficult journey towards improvement, and it's way more vast and complicated than a 15-minute YouTube video could hope to cover. I genuinely have no idea how these companies will respond in the end, and I fully expect them to make mistakes along the way. But in the end, all I can hope for is that they will listen, continue to take responsibility, and keep trying to do the next right thing. Son of a... I'm gonna go watch Hamilton again.
It was your idea, then let's go!
Well, you know it is a thrill when you go downhill, cause you're riding on the mountain of your own free will, and you're zipping in a flash on a daring dash, down a waterfall so rapid that you go split splash. Zip, 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 zip. Zip, 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 zip. Zip, 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 zip,